Matt, what's up, dude?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
We're good, brother.
Have you ever been introduced on a sports radio show with Tony Bennett? I left my heart in San Francisco.
If I have, it's been a while. So,
hey, man.
but I don't think this is about me, is it? It's I think about a certain guy who changed uniform numbers from 19 to number 1, and now he's number 1 in the hearts of the Washington Commanders fans, I'm sure.
There's definitely a lot of excitement, man. We are talking with our friend Matt Maiocco, covers the 49ers for NBC Sports Bay Area. You can follow him at Maiocco NBCS. Matt joins us on the Rude Guest Hotline. Rude's got the most reliable HVAC products in the DMV. All right, man. You and I talked a few different times last week about this. Neither of us were at all surprised. I think you said on our show you could get Deebo for a 5th. I think you were proven correct. What is Washington getting here?
Well, they're getting a chess piece. They're getting a guy who I think really fits well there from the standpoint, and this is kind of anecdotally speaking, but I would assume because of Jaden Daniels' running ability that the Commanders face a lot of zone defenses. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you don't want defensive backs. You don't want cornerbacks like turning and running with receivers down the field when a quarterback can run like that. Where Deebo Samuel excels is against zone coverage. He has a little bit of a difficult time getting free off the sticky man. So this plays into his hands. It plays into Jaden Daniels' hands. It plays into the Washington Commanders' hands very well because Jaden is an accurate thrower. When he hits Deebo Samuel across the middle, hitting him in stride, Deebo makes defensive backs make business decisions because he doesn't go down willingly and he doesn't shy away from contact. And so he's a tone setter. And, did his game drop off last year? Yes. There were a lot of reasons for that. He wasn't healthy throughout the season. He didn't miss too many games, but he had a difficult time. He was banged up. And that's kind of what you get too with his style of play. He also spent a couple nights during the week in the hospital with pneumonia. Wow. And he went after one game. He only played like 4 snaps. He was kind of battling something, couldn't quite figure out what it was. He didn't play much in the one game. And then he was in the hospital that night for a couple nights. But guess what? He was right back out on the field the following Sunday. So he didn't even miss any games with that. So, he's a guy that he sets the tone. And, when he's playing like Deebo, he has an impact on the offense, but he also has an impact on his own defense because they're sitting over there on the sideline. They're getting fired up watching him play. So, yeah, I think he'll be motivated. I think he'll come into the off-season program in really good shape. I think he wants to prove a lot of people wrong. He took a lot of heat this last off-season. Some of it he put on himself, but I think this is a really good fit, and obviously Adam Peters knows him very well. It's honestly one of the, I was talking to John Lynch about him just before they traded him. At that point, he had said that there is interest around the league, but he said that, man, whenever that day comes when they part ways with Deebo, and we knew it was going to be not long, he said that, there's nothing but love and gratitude and admiration. And he felt like all the draft picks that they've had through 8 seasons, Deebo Samuel ranks at the top of the list as far as one of the, being a favorite guy that they selected. They got to know him back in the 2019 Senior Bowl. The 49ers coached that team. Deebo Samuel was on it. They ended up taking him with the 36th pick. And then 11 months later, or 12 months later, from when they coached him in the Senior Bowl, they're playing in the Super Bowl, and Deebo Samuel was a big reason for that.
How much of this move was them trying to make sure they could secure more salary cap space than it was because of Deebo?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of reasons for this. ultimately, there was the salary implications and the money that they'd be paying for him. The 49ers have been near the top of the league in cash over cap spending. So they felt like they had to dial that back in order for this thing to just not get totally away from them when you have other big money contracts looming out there. Brock Purdy has basically been playing for free for 3 years. That'll change this offseason, or at least it should. And, so the 49ers did face a decision to make, what to do with him. They could have done, a post June 1 release that would have saved them a lot of money. The cap this year, and then next year it would have accelerated. And so I think they faced a difficult decision anyway, but it's just kind of weird. I can't really explain it other than just being around the team, being in a locker room, I don't know. I mean, you when you're in the building, you just kind of catch a vibe, and sometimes you can't really identify what it is, but it was just very obvious that it had run its course. And I think Deebo made it really easy on the 49ers when, after the season was over, he went in. He has a really tight relationship with Kyle Shanahan. And he told Kyle, he said, you know what, I think our time here is over. I think I'd like to be traded. And then he went up and talked to John Lynch. He expressed the same thing. And John said, hey, let's just take a deep breath. Why don't you sleep on it? We'll sleep on it. And then let's get back together and just kind of see if that is in fact the way you want to go, and then what we think about it as well. And so the sides kind of took a deep breath, and Deebo didn't change his mind. And John Lynch and the 49ers said, you know what? We're in agreement here. Let's see if we can do something to work this out. So there are a lot of reasons for it. From the standpoint of the 49ers, the salary cap implications are that as well. Maybe the 49ers felt like just the wear and tear had kind of caught up to Deebo to a degree. And by trading him, people say, well, gosh, 49ers only got a 5th round pick for him. Washington only had to give up a 5th round pick. Well, he was only signed for 1 more year,
right,
at a very high number. And the 49ers, part of their thinking was, okay, we get a player in return with a 5th round pick that we'll have under a very reasonable salary, basically just probably a little bit over $1 million a year over the course of the 4-year contract. So they decided it made sense. And I think it's one of those situations where, it's probably mutually beneficial for this. Well, it had 3 ways beneficial. It's probably beneficial for Deebo. He'll get his contract for this year. He can take another bite at the apple next offseason, a free agency, if he gets that far, unless Washington signs him to a long-term deal. I think it makes sense for the Commanders, short-term, no doubt about it. And then I think long-term, it makes sense for the 49ers.
Yeah, I do too. I think we're talking with our friend Matt Maiocco here on the Rude Guest Hotline. Maiocco covers the Niners, has for a long time, knows the organization inside and out. The way you've described Deebo kind of requesting the trade and Lynch and Kyle being cool about it. Obviously, Peters and Dan Quinn didn't draft John Allen and kind of develop it. They don't have the long back relationship that Kyle and John do. But I think it's a fairly similar situation that Washington's going through with John Allen. And whether or not he gets traded before next week, I don't think he's coming back one way or another. Did you hear any of the John Allen being involved in the Deebo trade, and then that kind of fell apart?
I didn't hear it. I mean, it was easy to connect the dots on that.
Yeah.
And you looked at it and you go, well, this kind of makes sense. I wonder if this could happen. I don't know the details on why it didn't happen. My thought would be that the 49ers felt, because this is a really good defensive tackle draft, that rather than paying big money and kind of having that uncertainty down the road, you could make kind of the long play of, selecting that defensive tackle in the whatever. I mean, it could be with the 11th overall pick, or it could be in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. The 49ers that now have 8 draft picks in the first 150 spots in this draft. So with a very strong defensive tackle draft, my thought would be the 49ers probably didn't want to kind of go away from the major reason they were going to be parting ways with Deebo anyway, was to use a draft pick, have that player under a fixed salary for 4 years, get younger, kind of have that. You need that constant churn, on the roster of the older guys who are making a lot of money and the young guys who step in and can be contributors, and you continue to develop them, and they're making not much money. And so I think that kind of goes with, part of the reason of parting ways with Deebo. You'd be kind of canceling that out if you were then to flip that and get an older defensive tackle.
Yeah, I think it's smart because the Niners, obviously the Purdy stuff is lingering, but even beyond that, they got, like, I pointed this out to BMitch earlier in the program. Warner, Kittle, and Trent don't have a guaranteed dollar on their deal this year. I find it hard to believe that all three of those dudes are there week one without a single guaranteed dollar.
Yeah, and that's, they understand that, right? And they'll at least with, I don't know if Trent. I'll take your word for that. I wasn't aware of that with Trent because he just redid his contract last year right before.
I always point out to people that, like, Over the Cap does a hell of a job, but they're not always completely correct on it.
Yeah, so I do think, last year they kind of settled that contract situation with Trent Williams. It's the reason that he held out pretty much all of training camp. With George Kittle, you're absolutely correct on that. And, the Cougars have a lot of stuff going on. Last week in Indianapolis, it was obviously the Deebo stuff was on the front burner. The Brock Purdy situation is, if it wasn't on the front burner, it was just one spot behind Deebo Samuel. So they've had talks with George and his agent and said, we're on the same page. Let's just, it's a matter of timing. We have some stuff that we have to deal with first, but it is very much on their radar that they have to do something with Kittle. And just talking about their salary situation, look at their roster. They have paid top dollar for, they will pay top dollar, I would assume. Maybe not the highest paid contract in the NFL, but Brock Purdy's going to get a significant pay bump whenever they sign him to a multi-year extension. Then you have McCaffrey, you have Trent Williams, you have George Kittle, you have Brandon Ayuk, you have Nick Bosa, you have Fred Warner.
Right.
They signed Yamador Lenore to a nice contract. Those are some players who are making top dollar for their position in the NFL. And so you just can't continue to just throw money away because that weakens your roster. And maybe that's part of the reason why 49ers special teams last year were so god awful. So you need to make some tough decisions. You need to be able to supplement your roster with draft picks who step in and perform at a high level and ultimately kind of line themselves up to be the next people, who get that second contract. And so this is part of it. There's difficult decisions to be made. I didn't even mention Kyle Juszczyk, the top paid fullback in the league.
Right.
So, I think that this kind of fit well. They're sending him to a place where he's going to be well taken care of, no doubt about it. I just saw the NFLPA rankings where the Commanders, talk about a comeback. The Commanders organization, holy cow. And I remember us talking a year ago when they made those two hires. And I was very bullish on the Commanders. They became, they went from probably the most unlikable team organization in the NFL to, wow, what an overnight transformation that organization has made. So
I remember you texted me about Peters like right away. And he's just, a quarterback could change everything, but organizationally they're built the right way now. But it's funny you talk about San Fran. B, didn't you say when you were playing one of the few teams, everybody was always like, man, I could go play there, was the Niners?
It was the Niners. Because the ownership, everybody loved it. And, and I think, like I was telling JP also, Matt, like Kyle and, I can't think,
Lynch.
They've been there for a while now.
Yeah.
When does things start changing? Like, because their expectations now is Super Bowl.
Yeah.
It's not just make it to the playoffs.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the fan base here gets kind of restless. You know, the 5 Super Bowl trophies, the Lombardis in the lobby have been there for a while, and they're getting dusty. And the fan base, you know, there's a whole generation of 49er fans who have not experienced their team winning a Super Bowl. And so there's certainly a degree of restlessness here. And but if you were around this team, you know, even when they were experiencing success with Harbaugh, the organization was kind of all over the place. And there's a lot of dysfunction. The general manager and the head coach did not work well together. Then they went through a couple of years of just outright fiasco with a couple of coaches, and they ended up switching their general manager. Well, this team has found stability, and the head coach and the general manager are very competent. They're very good at what they do. They work well together. The locker room has been really solid. The thing they're lacking is a Super Bowl title. And it's not that they haven't had their opportunities. I mean, 4 trips to the NFC Championship game in 5 years, 2 trips to the Super Bowl, you know, 1 10-point second half lead in the Super Bowl. The only team in NFL history last year to take 2 leads in the fourth quarter and a lead in overtime and still lose, and it just wasn't any game as the Super Bowl. So they've come excruciatingly close. The fan base is restless, but ownership is like, hey, we know what it's been like, how difficult it is to find a GM and a coach who work well together. So, you know, Jed York, basically who's acting as the owner, the decision maker, is just like he has more confidence in Lynch and Shanahan to turn this team around from a 16-11 season than he would any other tandem in the league. So I don't know. I mean, I get the question a lot from 49ers fans, like, are they going into this season on the hot seat? And the answer is no, they're certainly not on the hot seat. But we also know how quickly things change in the NFL.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when, you know, people always ask me, hey, if they don't make the playoffs, you know, are they going to get fired? And it's like, well, you got to tell me how it looks and how it feels, because there are times, you know, either way, a team could have a winning record, a team could be a losing record. I go back to just kind of that vibe in the building. You can tell when a change is needed. You can tell when the locker room has splintered. You can tell when the coach has lost his voice and doesn't carry the same authority that he did, you know, earlier in his career, or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, it's a long answer for you, but there's no indication that there's, like, you know, running out of patience. But yeah, I also understand where the fan base is, as far as, you know, they've done everything but win a Super Bowl title, and that's the ultimate goal, to win a Super Bowl title.
It's funny because when you describe fractured locker rooms and coaches losing their voice, like, I know those locker rooms. I covered a lot of those. This year was something different entirely for me, and this is kind of the vibe you're used to. But that is wild. Was the Niners' last Super Bowl win Steve Young?
It was. It was.
Wow.
Would have been when they were playing Super Bowls in January. It would have been January of 1995.
Wow, man! I mean, lose 2 to the Chiefs. Then, they lost the 1 to the Ravens too, right? That's crazy.
They lost 1 to the Ravens with Harbaugh. They've lost 2 to the Chiefs in all 3 of those games. And before that, they were 5-0 in Super Bowls. And in those 3 Super Bowls, I mean, those were close. And the one that I guess it would have been Super Bowl, LIV. That's the one, or was it? Maybe it wasn't. There's the one in Miami in February of 2020, where they had a 10-point lead. I think they ended up losing by 10. But, you know, that was one they got away from. Well, all of them got away from. They could have easily won that one against the Ravens. That was the Kaepernick.
That was the wild
team.
Comeback after the
wild comeback, and then that fell short when they they had 4 cracks at it inside the 5-yard line and threw fades to the right side to Crabtree on 3 straight downs. So they, like I said, and it's been an ultra successful John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan tandem here, except for they haven't done it and they haven't climbed that mountaintop. And you talk to 49er fans, and that's all that's important. The people that kind of lose sight of, they need to change, or these guys can't do it, is it's really difficult to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And it's even, I almost think it's even more difficult to just find the right touch with the organization, with ownership, with front office, with coaching staff, finding the right players in the locker room, the right kind of guys. You don't know what a guy is about until you get him in your locker room, whether it's going out in free agency. The 49ers went out and got a guy in free agency, Devondre Campbell, who they needed, veteran guy that had a pretty good reputation, I think. And he ends up like quitting on the team late in the season, refuses to go on the field. And so you don't know, like, all these factors are just, it's a fascinating business, because you don't know how people work together until they actually are put in that position to working together.
Hey, dude, we really appreciate your time, Matt. Thank you, man.
Appreciate you, Matt.
Okay, always my pleasure. Thanks, guys. Enjoy Deebo.
All right, man.
We'll do, man. That's Matt Maiocco, covers the Niners, Maiocco NBCS. Check out his podcast and all his work for NBC Sports Bay Area.